The evidence was fabricated. The verdict had already been decided, and the punishment was death. Now, Vikir knelt beneath a towering guillotine as two executioners stood beside him. Members of the Baskerville family watched silently from the shadows. Standing before them all was Hugo Le Baskerville, the patriarch, the man Vikir had spent his entire life serving, the man responsible for his downfall. Moonlight illuminated Hugo's face as he slowly raised his hand. The execution ground became completely silent. Vikir stared at him without fear. Only hatred remained in his eyes. After everything he had done for the family, after all the blood he had spilled in their name, this was how they repaid him. At that moment, Vikir finally understood the truth. He had never been family. He had never been a son. He had only ever been a tool, a hunting dog. And now that dog was no longer needed. Hugo lowered his hand. The blade came crashing down. As darkness swallowed his vision, Vikir made a vow. If fate ever gave him another chance, he would never live as a hound again. Never. But instead of dying, Vikir suddenly opened his eyes. The sound of crying babies filled the room. His body felt weak, heavy, unfamiliar. Confused, he looked around and realized he was lying inside a nursery surrounded by dozens of infants. For a moment, he thought he had somehow ended up in hell. But then realization struck him. This wasn't hell, this was the past. Somehow, impossibly, he had returned to the very beginning of his life. Vikir had been reborn, and this time, everything would be different. As he tried to process what had happened, the door to the nursery opened. A tall, intimidating man entered the room. Hugo Le Baskerville, the same man who had ordered his execution. The same man he swore to kill. The patriarch slowly walked between the cradles, inspecting each child one by one. Most of the babies cried loudly. Hugo dismissed them with disgust. To him, they were weak, worthless, trash. But then, he stopped in front of Vikir. Unlike the others, Vikir remained silent. Even as a newborn, his eyes contained an intelligence far beyond his age. For a brief moment, Hugo seemed interested. Then he issued an order. Move him to the cradle of swords. The attendants immediately obeyed. Hearing those words caused memories to flood Vikir's mind. The cradle of swords, one of the Baskerville family's cruelest traditions. Every child born into the family was forced to crawl through a deadly maze filled with blades. At the end of the maze waited the legendary Styx River, a mystical river capable of strengthening the bodies of young children. However, the blessing wasn't unlimited. Only the first children to reach the river would receive its full benefits. In his previous life, Vikir had failed. His siblings had outperformed him. His opportunity had been stolen. But this time would be different. This time, he possessed decades of experience. This time, he knew exactly what to do. As soon as the trial began, Vikir forced his tiny body forward. Sharp blades cut his skin. Blood stained the ground. Yet he continued crawling. Pain meant nothing to him. Compared to execution, this was nothing. Eventually, he reached the end of the maze. Without hesitation, he threw himself into the Styx River. The moment his body touched the water, unbearable pain exploded through every bone in his body. It felt as though his flesh was being torn apart and rebuilt from scratch. Yet Vikir refused to leave. He knew opportunities like this only appeared once. Outside the river, attendants shouted for him to come out. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The adults began to panic. No child had ever remained submerged for this long. Even Hugo began paying attention. 7 minutes. That was how long Vikir remained inside the Styx River, an amount that should have been impossible. The water seeped into his bones, into his muscles, into every part of his body, transforming him, strengthening him, forging him into something far greater than before. Eventually, even Vikir began losing consciousness. Water filled his lungs, his vision blurred. Still, he refused to give up. Endure, endure, endure. Those were the only words echoing through his mind. Just before he drowned, Hugo finally pulled him from the river. Looking down at the child, the patriarch laughed. He had never seen a baby so greedy. As Vikir struggled to remain conscious, Hugo asked for his name. The answer came quickly. Vikir Van Baskerville. The patriarch smirked. A very greedy son has been born. But Hugo had no idea what kind of monster stood before him. Because while everyone else saw a child, Vikir saw his future killer. When Vikir opened his eyes again, he immediately noticed something had changed. His body felt stronger, much stronger. After spending 7 full minutes submerged in the Styx River, he had absorbed far more of its blessing than anyone else. In his previous life, this opportunity had been stolen from him. But this time, he had taken everything for himself. For the first time since his regression, Vikir felt like he had gained an advantage. But the Baskerville family was not a place where advantages lasted for long. As Vikir rested in the nursery, the door suddenly opened. A maid quietly entered the room, carrying a small box. At first, Vikir paid little attention. The Baskerville family had never shown him kindness before, so he certainly wasn't expecting gifts now. However, the maid's nervous expression immediately caught his attention. She carefully placed the box on his bed and quickly left the room. The moment she disappeared, Vikir knew something was wrong. Very wrong. Slowly, the lid of the box began to move. Then, 2 bloody mambas emerged from inside. Highly venomous snakes, the kind capable of killing grown adults. For a brief moment, Vikir remained silent. Then he understood. This wasn't a gift. It was an assassination attempt. Even as a baby, someone within the Baskerville family already considered him a threat. And whoever had sent the snakes clearly wanted to eliminate competition before it had a chance to grow. The 2 mambas slithered toward him, their fangs exposed. Most infants would have died instantly. But Vikir wasn't an infant. Mentally, he was a veteran warrior who had survived countless battlefields. Without hesitation, he grabbed both snakes with his bare hands. The venomous creatures twisted violently as they attempted to bite him. But Vikir refused to let go. The struggle continued throughout the night. By morning, both snakes were dead. The nursery attendants were horrified. A baby was sleeping peacefully beside 2 dead venomous serpents. The entire Baskerville household fell into chaos. An investigation began immediately. Several attendants were blamed. Punishments followed. Yet the true culprit was never discovered. Only Vikir knew the truth. And as he stared at the dead snakes, he made another promise to himself. One day, every person responsible for his suffering would pay. 8 years passed. By now, Vikir had become known throughout the family as a strange child. His intelligence far exceeded his age, his physical development was extraordinary, and the rumors surrounding him only continued to grow. Some claimed he had survived the Styx River through sheer luck. Others whispered about the 2 dead mambas. Regardless of what people believed, one thing was certain. Vikir was different. One day, while attending class, Vikir listened as his instructor explained the ranks of swordsmanship. The teacher described the various stages: sword beginner, sword expert, sword graduator, and, finally, sword master, the highest level a swordsman could reach. When Hugo Le Baskerville's name was mentioned as a sword master, the other students reacted with admiration. But Vikir remained silent. Unlike the others, he knew exactly how powerful Hugo truly was. And he also knew that if he wanted revenge, he would eventually have to surpass him. That thought consumed his mind. How long would it take? 5 years, 10 years, 20! No matter how long it took, Vikir was willing to wait. Because unlike his previous life, he now possessed something priceless: time. Unfortunately, someone else had noticed him as well. 3 pairs of eyes stared at him from across the room. The triplets. Hugo's infamous trident, Hibber, Middlebrow, and Lobero. In Vikir's previous life, these 3 would eventually become major figures within the Baskerville family. More importantly, they had played a role in his downfall. The moment class ended, the triplets approached him. Insults quickly followed. They mocked his status, mocked the rumors surrounding him, mocked his birth. To them, Vikir was nothing more than a bastard. But Vikir simply listened. Because unlike the triplets, he knew exactly how their future would unfold. One of the boys suddenly pulled out a knife. A cruel grin appeared on his face. He brought up the legend surrounding the Styx River. The rumor claimed that anyone who remained submerged long enough would develop skin harder than steel. The triplets wanted to test that theory. On Vikir, one of them grabbed him from behind. Another pressed the knife against his skin. And the third laughed. If this really works, I'll eat my own hand. The blade cut across Vikir's body. 1 minute passed. Nothing happened. 3 minutes passed. Still nothing. 10 minutes passed. The triplets slowly began to realize something terrifying. The legend was true. Their knife couldn't pierce Vikir's skin. At first they were shocked, then they became bored. Eventually they released him. But the moment the triplet holding Vikir let go, he noticed something horrifying. Blood covered his hand. Confused, he looked down. One of his fingers was missing. Meanwhile, Vikir calmly opened his mouth and spat the severed finger onto the ground. Silence filled the area. The triplet's face turned pale. The other 2 froze in place. Then Vikir smiled. A cold smile, a dangerous smile, and he reminded the boy of the promise he had made. After all, he had said he would eat his own hand. The triplets immediately panicked. One suggested finding a priest. Another tried calming the situation. But Vikir wasn't finished, not even close. One of the brothers lunged at him with the knife again, calling him a bastard, calling him inferior, claiming seniority because he was older. The knife struck, but once again, it failed. The blade couldn't pierce Vikir's skin. Before the triplet could react, Vikir grabbed his arm, then twisted. A sickening crack echoed through the air. The boy screamed in pain. Vikir's expression remained completely emotionless. Because unlike these children, he had survived wars. He had survived monsters. He had survived execution. To him, this wasn't bullying. This was discipline. And as the triplets trembled in fear, Vikir reminded them of a simple truth. This was Baskerville, a place where age meant nothing, only strength mattered. And unfortunately for them, they had just picked a fight with the strongest child in the family.